Was there anything more isolating than being the most powerful man in the room, yet feeling utterly invisible? Alexander Vance, CEO of Vance Industries, usually commanded attention, but today, at his former mentor's lavish wedding, he was just a lone figure at a table for 8, 7 chairs conspicuously empty. The clinking of champagne glasses and the murmur of happy conversations only amplified the hollow ache in his chest, a stark reminder of the personal cost of his empire. He had traded companionship for success, and in this moment, it felt like a terrible bargain. He watched as couples danced, their laughter echoing through the grand ballroom. Each twirl, each embrace, was a tiny dagger to his carefully constructed stoicism. He remembered a time when he believed love was a luxury he couldn't afford, a distraction from his ambition. Now he wondered if he had simply convinced himself of that, a convenient excuse to avoid the vulnerability it demanded. The warmth of the room seemed to mock his inner chill. He reached for his untouched glass of water, his hand feeling heavy. The spotlight was on the happy couple, and he was content to remain in the shadows, a silent observer of a joy he felt he no longer deserved. But as the toast began, and he prepared to fade further into the background, a soft, unexpected voice whispered beside him, shattering his solitude. "Pretend you're with me." Alexander's head snapped towards the sound, his surprise evident. A woman stood beside his chair, her eyes, a startling shade of emerald, wide with a silent plea. She was beautiful, in a disheveled, urgent kind of way, her elegant dress slightly askew, a stray curl falling across her forehead. He recognized her from earlier, a distant acquaintance of the bride, someone he'd barely registered in the blur of polite introductions. His first instinct was to question her, to demand an explanation for this bizarre intrusion. His CEO brain immediately started cataloging the possibilities. A PR stunt, a desperate plea for attention, perhaps even a bizarre form of blackmail. He was not accustomed to unexpected deviations from his meticulously planned life, especially not at such a public event. Yet, there was something in her eyes, a flicker of genuine fear and desperation, that held his sharp retort at bay. It wasn't the look of a schemer, but of someone truly cornered. Before he could form a single word, she subtly nudged a small, decorative bird cage under his table with her foot, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture. Her gaze flickered nervously towards a group of stern-looking men across the room, who were now scanning the crowd with an unnerving intensity. Who was this woman, and what dangerous game had she just pulled him into? Alexander, renowned for his lightning-fast analytical skills, quickly processed the visual cues. The hurried whisper, the anxious glance, the hidden bird cage. This wasn't a pickup line, it was a distress signal. His protective instincts, usually reserved for his company and his few trusted employees, unexpectedly flared. He might be alone, but he wasn't heartless. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of assent, a silent agreement to her unspoken request. He watched as she slid gracefully into the empty chair beside him, her movements fluid despite her obvious tension, a faint scent of jasmine and something distinctly metallic, perhaps fear, wafted from her. He saw the subtle relief that washed over her face, and for a fleeting moment he felt a strange sense of purpose. He, Alexander Vance, the man who avoided personal entanglements, was now an unwitting participant in someone else's desperate drama. The stern-looking men across the room paused their search, their eyes sweeping over Alexander and his new companion, then moving on. The immediate danger seemed to have passed. He leaned in slightly, his voice a low rumble, barely audible above the music. "What?" he began, his tone betraying none of his internal turmoil. "Exactly did I just sign up for?" The woman, whose name Alexander still didn't know, let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice laced with genuine gratitude. "You have no idea. She cast another nervous glance at the now receding men, then turned back to him, her emerald eyes meeting his. "My name is Lena, and what I've got under your table, it's priceless." Priceless. Alexander had heard that word many times in the context of art, rare artifacts, and cutting-edge technology. But Lena's tone carried a weight that transcended mere monetary value. It was a word imbued with desperation, with risk, with the kind of high stakes that usually only existed in spy thrillers, not at a society wedding. His analytical mind, however, was already connecting the dots. The birdcage, the pursuers, the priceless item. He subtly shifted his foot, feeling the cool, metallic surface of the cage. It wasn't heavy, but there was a distinct, almost imperceptible vibration coming from within. Not a bird, then. What could be so valuable, so dangerous, that it required this kind of clandestine maneuvering? And why choose him, the solitary CEO, as her unwitting accomplice? "Show me," Alexander murmured, his voice low and firm. He was used to being in control, to understanding the parameters of any situation. Lena hesitated, her gaze darting around the increasingly festive room. The band had picked up the tempo, and more couples were flocking to the dance floor, providing a convenient curtain of movement. She seemed to make a quick decision. With surprising agility, she bent down, her movements concealed by the tablecloth, and carefully pulled the birdcage out from under the table, just enough for Alexander to see its contents without drawing attention. It wasn't a bird, as he suspected. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like shredded silk, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It hummed faintly, a delicate, almost imperceptible vibration emanating from within. The box itself appeared ancient, worn smooth by centuries of touch, yet radiating an undeniable energy. Lena quickly pushed the cage back under the table, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes were wide, pleading with him for understanding. "It's not just ancient," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's alive, and they want it back. They'll do anything to get it back." What secrets did this ancient box hold, and who exactly were they? Alexander's mind raced. An alive, ancient box? This wasn't some corporate espionage or a stolen jewel. This was something far more enigmatic and potentially dangerous. The humming vibration, the urgency in Lena's eyes, the phantom threat of them. It all painted a picture that was both thrilling and terrifying. He found himself drawn into the mystery, a stark contrast to the predictable world of finance he inhabited. He subtly scanned the room, his gaze sharper now, searching for anything amiss. The wedding guests, oblivious to the high-stakes drama unfolding at their table, continued to celebrate. But Alexander, with his newfound awareness, began to notice subtle details. A flicker of movement near the ballroom entrance, a shadow that seemed to linger too long by a potted palm. He was no longer just an observer, he was a participant, and the game had just gotten real. "We need to move," Alexander stated, his decision made. Staying put, waiting to be found, was not an option. He extended his hand to Lena. "Dance with me." His offer was not a romantic gesture, but a strategic move, a way to blend into the joyful chaos of the dance floor, to escape the prying eyes that were undoubtedly still searching for them. Lena, though surprised, didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his, and a jolt of unexpected electricity passed between them. He led her onto the dance floor, moving with a practiced ease that belied his usual reserved demeanor. He was an excellent dancer, a skill he rarely showcased, but now it served as a perfect disguise. They became just another couple, swaying to the music, their faces carefully neutral, while beneath the surface, a desperate plan unfolded. As they moved, Alexander subtly positioned himself, his body shielding Lena, his eyes scanning the perimeter. He saw one of the stern-faced men from earlier, now casually leaning against a pillar, his gaze sweeping the dance floor. Their charade was working for now. But how long could they maintain this illusion, and what was their next move to truly escape? As Alexander guided Lena through the intricate steps of the waltz, a strange sense of familiarity settled between them, a silent understanding born of shared peril. He felt a rare crack in his carefully constructed emotional walls, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The warmth of her hand in his, the subtle scent of jasmine, the unexpected lightness of their shared movements. It was disarming. "This box," Alexander murmured, his voice low. "What is it, really?" He needed information, not just to protect her, but to understand the forces they were up against. Lena's gaze was distant, as if she were looking into another time. "It's called the Lyra's Compass," she finally whispered. "My family has been its protector for generations. It doesn't just point to places, it points to destinies. And it's connected to a lost civilization, a power capable of reshaping the world." A lost civilization? Destinies? Alexander, the pragmatist, felt a flicker of disbelief, yet the intensity in Lena's eyes, the desperate plea he'd seen earlier, convinced him she wasn't fabricating this. But if this was true, what kind of immense power were they truly protecting, and who would stop at nothing to control it? The music swelled, and Alexander tightened his grip on Lena's hand, feeling the tremor that ran through her. "Why you?" he pressed, his voice barely audible over the crescendo. "Why do they think you can awaken it?" Lena's emerald eyes, usually so vibrant, were clouded with a deep-seated sadness. "My grandmother. She was the last one," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "She told me stories, taught me the ancient language, the rituals. They believe I inherited her gift, her knowledge." Alexander's mind reeled. Ancient languages, rituals, inherited gifts. This was far beyond anything he had ever encountered. He had built an empire on logic and calculated risks, and now he was caught in a whirlwind of mystical secrets. Yet, a part of him, a part he rarely acknowledged, felt a thrilling spark of intrigue. The world he thought he knew was suddenly expanding, revealing hidden layers of wonder and danger. The men who were pursuing them were clearly not typical criminals. They were after something far greater than money or power. They were after a force that could alter the course of human destiny. He felt a sudden, profound responsibility for Lena, for the ancient secret she carried. But could he, a man of modern science and industry, truly protect something so deeply rooted in myth and magic? As the song ended, Alexander and Lena gracefully detached, blending back into the crowd. They moved towards a quieter corner, near a large window overlooking the city lights. Just as they were about to step behind a curtain, a hand suddenly shot out, grabbing Lena's arm. "Looking for this, perhaps?" a cold voice sneered. It was one of the men, a tall, imposing figure with an unnervingly calm demeanor. His grip on Lena was firm, and his eyes, as cold and gray as a winter sky, were fixed on Alexander. "And who might you be? Interfering with our acquisition?" he questioned, a subtle threat in his tone. Alexander's CEO persona, usually reserved for boardrooms, snapped into place. He met the man's gaze unflinchingly. "I am Alexander Vance," he stated, his voice resonating with authority. "And she is my guest. I suggest you release her immediately." The man's eyes flickered, a hint of surprise crossing his face. Alexander Vance's reputation preceded him, even in the shadows of this arcane world. But would his name and power be enough to deter these relentless pursuers? The man hesitated for a split second, weighing the unexpected obstacle. Alexander used that moment to his advantage. With a swift, practiced movement, he subtly adjusted his jacket, and as he did, he deliberately brushed against a passing waiter, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor with a spectacular shatter. The sudden noise and commotion drew everyone's attention, including the stern-faced man. In the ensuing chaos, Alexander pulled Lena away, their brief encounter with the pursuer lost in the flurry of apologies and broken glass. They melted into the crowd, moving quickly towards a discreet service exit he had noticed earlier. Lena glanced back, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. He had acted instinctively, decisively, and it had worked. They pushed through the exit door, emerging into a quiet alleyway bathed in the glow of city lights. The cold night air was a stark contrast to the oppressive warmth of the ballroom. That was impressive, Lena admitted, a faint smile touching her lips despite the danger. You're full of surprises, Mr. Vance. But the question remained. Where could they go now, with nowhere left to hide? Alexander didn't respond to her compliment, his mind already calculating their next move. We need a secure location, he stated, his voice brisk. Somewhere they won't expect us to go. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, already contacting his most trusted head of security. Lena watched him, a new kind of trust blossoming in her eyes. He wasn't just helping her, he was taking charge, protecting her with a competence she hadn't anticipated. As they walked swiftly through the labyrinthine streets, Alexander felt an unfamiliar lightness, a sense of exhilaration that had been absent from his life for years. This wasn't a hostile takeover or a corporate merger. It was a real, visceral fight for survival, and he was surprisingly good at it. He was seeing a side of himself he'd long suppressed, a side that thrived on immediate danger and quick thinking. They won't stop, Lena said, her voice softer now, almost a murmur against the urban hum. They believe the Lyra's compass is theirs by right, an inheritance from their ancestors who first wielded its power. They call themselves the Guardians of the Dawn. Guardians of the Dawn. The name itself sent a shiver down Alexander's spine. What ancient, powerful organization had they inadvertently tangled with? They reached a discreet, unmarked building in a less trafficked part of the city. One of Alexander's many hidden assets, a safe house used for high-level, confidential meetings. The security measures were formidable, a fortress against intrusion. Inside, the space was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the ancient mystery they carried. For the first time all evening, Lena allowed herself to relax, the tension visibly draining from her shoulders. Alexander activated the advanced surveillance system, his eyes scanning the multiple screens displaying views of the surrounding streets. We're safe here, for now, he assured her, his voice softer than before. He offered her a glass of water, and she accepted it gratefully, her hands still trembling slightly. You didn't have to do this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You could have just let them take me. He met her gaze, his own surprisingly gentle. Perhaps, he conceded. But I don't abandon those in need, especially when an injustice is being committed. He paused, then added, Besides, I'm intrigued. What exactly does this Lyra's compass do? And what happens if it falls into the wrong hands? He saw a flicker of determination return to her eyes, a spark of hope that had been absent. Lena carefully retrieved the birdcage, then the ancient wooden box, from its hiding place. She set it on a pristine glass table, the antique artifact looking strangely out of place amidst the modern technology. Alexander leaned in, his gaze fixed on the intricate carvings that adorned its surface. They depicted constellations, mythical creatures, and symbols he vaguely recognized from ancient lore. It doesn't just point to destinies, Lena began, her voice gaining strength. It influences them. In the right hands, it can bring peace and prosperity, guide humanity towards its highest potential. But in the wrong hands... She trailed off, a shadow crossing her face. It can twist fate, ignite wars, bring about unimaginable destruction. My ancestors used it to steer civilizations, to avert catastrophes. The Guardians want to use it to reshape the world in their image, to control everyone's destiny. Alexander felt a profound chill. This wasn't just a valuable artifact. It was a weapon of immense power, capable of manipulating the very fabric of existence. The weight of their shared burden suddenly felt immense. He, a man who believed in free will and individual choice, was now protecting an object that could strip humanity of both. How could they possibly stop an organization that sought to control destiny itself? "My grandmother left me a journal," Lena revealed, her voice barely a whisper. She pulled a small, leather-bound book from her bag, its pages yellowed with age. It contains prophecies, warnings, and instructions. Alexander watched as she carefully opened the journal, her fingers tracing ancient script. It speaks of a time when the compass would awaken, and a watcher would emerge, a solitary soul destined to aid its protector. Watcher, solitary soul. Alexander felt a strange, prickling sensation on his skin. He had always been solitary, a lone wolf in the corporate world, observing, strategizing. Could this ancient prophecy, this fantastical tale, somehow be intertwined with his own life? He, the cynical billionaire CEO, a participant in a destiny woven by myths. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence of the past few hours was undeniable. The prophecy also speaks of a nexus point, Lena continued, her eyes fixed on the journal. A specific location at a specific time where the compass's power can be truly harnessed for good or for ill. And according to the journal, that nexus point is tonight at midnight, at the very wedding we just escaped. The realization hit Alexander like a physical blow. They had just fled the center of the storm, only to discover they needed to return. Alexander's mind, usually so sharp and logical, struggled to reconcile the ancient prophecy with their present predicament. "They know this, don't they?" he asked, his voice tight. "The Guardians, they know about the nexus point." Lena nodded, her face grim. "They've been searching for the nexus point for decades. My grandmother managed to keep it hidden, but they must have found another way to decipher the prophecy, or perhaps they've captured other protectors. They're planning to activate the compass tonight, to seize control of its power." The full scope of the Guardians' plan became terrifyingly clear. They weren't just after the box. They were after the power to rewrite history, to impose their will on the world. And they intended to do it tonight, at the very heart of what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. The thought of such immense power wielded by an insidious organization filled Alexander with a fierce resolve. He might have been alone at that wedding, but he wouldn't let Lena face this alone. "We have to go back," he stated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Lena looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and newfound courage. "But how?" she whispered. "How do we stop them from activating it?" The weight of the world, quite literally, rested on their shoulders. They formulated a desperate plan, piecing together information from Lena's journal and Alexander's intimate knowledge of the wedding venue's layout and security. The element of surprise was their only advantage. They would return to the wedding, infiltrate the nexus point, and somehow prevent the Guardians from activating the Lyra's compass. It was a suicide mission, but the alternative, a world controlled by the Guardians of the Dawn, was unthinkable. As they made their way back, Alexander and Lena moved with a synchronized urgency, their bond forged in the crucible of shared danger. He realized he hadn't thought about his company, his billions, or his loneliness for hours. All that mattered was the present moment, the woman beside him, and the ancient power they were fighting to protect. He found himself not only protecting her, but truly seeing her, for the first time in his life truly connecting with another human being on a level beyond superficial pleasantries. They slipped back into the wedding venue through a service entrance, their faces grim, their hearts pounding in unison. The sounds of celebration still echoed through the halls, a stark contrast to the grim reality they carried. They knew they were walking into a trap, into the lion's den. But what awaited them at the nexus point, And could two unlikely allies truly stand against an ancient organization determined to control destiny itself? They found the nexus point in a hidden alcove beneath the grand staircase, a place Alexander knew was rarely disturbed. The Guardians were already there, a dozen stern figures in dark robes, surrounding a pedestal where the Lyra's compass now rested, pulsating with an eerie light. A robed figure, presumably their leader, stood before it, chanting in an ancient tongue. The air crackled with a palpable energy, a sense of immense power building. Lena clutched Alexander's arm, her face pale. "They're almost there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're activating it." Alexander felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the culmination of a night that had begun with a whispered plea and had spiraled into a battle for the fate of humanity. He knew he had to act, and fast. With a roar that surprised even himself, Alexander burst from their hiding place, a distraction designed to draw their attention. As the Guardians turned, startled by his sudden appearance, Lena, with a fierce determination, sprinted towards the compass, the ancient journal clutched in her hand, a desperate hope illuminating her eyes. Would Alexander's heroic act buy her enough time? And could Lena, with her grandmother's wisdom, truly stop the Guardians before the Lyra's compass unleashed its destiny-altering power upon the world?